Hi everybody, my name is Jacob Shaw, Wellness Coordinator at SSP Wellness in Alton, Illinois. This video is just a disclaimer to make sure before engaging in any sort of new physical activity routine, check in with your doctor to make sure you are cleared for light, moderate, or even vigorous intensity exercise. Always check your surroundings to make sure it's clear of any objects or any other risks, and be safe. So this is a new video series at SSP Wellness going over how to engage in running from a point of safety. Running is a very, very high impact exercise. It doesn't matter how good your technique is, if your biomechanics are perfect, if you have the appropriate shoes, there's always going to be a measure of force going into the joints in the ankle, the knee, the hips, the low back, etc. So what we can do is try to minimize or mitigate some of the risk by learning how to do it as properly as possible. First, there is always going to be some hurdles when engaging in running, especially for an untrained individual. Myself, I have never really taken up running as a sport or as part of my exercise regimen. I used to do inline skating for a while. I've been a weightlifter for a long time, but that's really not the same sort of training, and it doesn't affect the bodies in the same way, so it's not developing certain efficiencies. I won't go into the details of the energy systems, but know that engaging in running as a weightlifter is almost like starting fresh. Some of these small imbalances could be the way that your foot strikes when you're hitting the ground, whether it be you're a heel striker and you're striking with the back of your foot, whether you're an overpronator and when you run and when you lift your feet, you actually strike on the inside of your foot quite a bit. All of these different biomechanical errors, if you will, put a little more undue force on certain parts of the body and take away from some of the things that could be helping eliminate some of that shock and to keep us healthy and happy. Anterior pelvic tilt is another one of them. I won't go into all of the details, but it would benefit any new runner to have one of their friends who is an experienced runner videotape them and go over these techniques with them, or to hire a professional to work with you on your running technique in the beginning to avoid injury. Another thing that we do want to focus on is starting mindful of that this is a beginning of a new journey. So we want to, properly warm up before we go into a run, properly stretch before and after a run, limit the runs in our first weeks and months to something that is feasible and attainable, setting those SMART goals. For this video series, we are going to be recording our rate of perceived exertion at the end of every run, our maximal heart rate, our average heart rate, the distance traveled, the amount of time it took to travel that distance or the duration, as well as a couple other key biometrics to show progress over the long term. The idea of this program is so that you guys can relate to my journey as a novice engaging in running. I hope you guys enjoy it. So, when we're talking about biomechanics, we're talking about how our body moves in relation to how we think our body moves. We're talking about the technique that we are trying to imitate or perform. And an example of that I used already was pronation. Pronation of the foot in terms that whenever you are running, you are turning your foot in and you're striking more with the inside of the foot. So as I'm running, I am landing on the inside of my foot, creating a greater amount of stress on certain parts of the body and less stress than is normal on other parts of the body. This is going to develop additional imbalances and potentially cause pain and discomfort. So first thing is identifying your foot strike, making sure that you don't strike too hard on the heel. Make sure that you're a midfoot striker. You can slightly land on the ball of your foot as long as you're coming down to flat foot. And then getting the appropriate shoes. I did already go out and purchase a proper running shoe. This running shoe is for overpronation. It does seem to help quite a bit with eliminating some low back discomfort that I experience when running. Also, depending on if you are going to be engaging in running outdoors in a hiking trail, or if you're going to be putting in more than 1 or 2 miles, it may benefit you to get some sort of hydration device. A lot of times holding a big bottle like this is not going to really be conducive when you're trying to run for prolonged periods of time. I personally went out and got a hydration pack. This is going to help not only to mount the GoPro in the front whenever I am recording videos of the actual runs themselves, but also if I potentially start leading hikes again this year. Great tool to have. It's hands-free. It has pockets in it. I advise it, but do whatever you feel comfortable with. So getting the proper equipment is going to be very, very important. Another thing is, I know from my body that I have extremely tight hip flexors. These hip flexors, the one in particular that does cause me some low back discomfort, is called the psoas muscle. The psoas muscle attaches all the way up in the back in T12, and it attaches all the way down in the front of the hips here. So as you're running and these get really tight from the constant lifting of your legs, it really starts to compress the lower back, and it can cause additional discomfort. It's something that will rear its ugly head at a certain point you're running. It sometimes will relax a little bit as you continue going, and sometimes it won't. So we will go over effective stretching routines prior to running, and then especially after running, in order to not develop more imbalances or additional muscle tightness. So there are a variety of ways we can warm up pre-run. I like traveling directly from my house to wherever I'm running if I'm running locally. So I use that distance as part of my warm-up. I will do some walking high knees where I'm bringing my knees up like this. I will do some butt kicks. I will do some jumping jogs side to side gently whenever I'm headed there. I will do a ready pace power walk. It's really up to you. The idea is really just to increase your core body temperature and get those muscles moving, get some enzymes moving from place to place. It's really, really important that you warm up, then do your pre-run stretching, and then engage in the actual run. The pre-run stretching shouldn't last more than maybe 4 or 5 minutes. All right, so pre and post stretching. Very, very important part of a running routine. There are 5 stretches I like to do prior to running. The first one is a calf stretch. We're stretching out gastrocnemius and soleus, muscles in the back of the leg here. So what we'll do is we'll place our heel on the ground and elevate the ball of our foot and press it up against an object, keeping a tall center of gravity. We will gently lean forward, pressing into that until we feel it pull on the back of the low leg. This stretch should be uncomfortable but not painful. We're going to hold each stretch for about 30 to 45 seconds and then move on to the other side. Stretch number 2 is going to be a stretch for piriformis. You can do this seated in a chair. I would advise doing it seated in a chair like so. The idea would be, with our tall upright form, the idea would be that our legs would be virtually parallel to the ground. We would try to place our ankle on top of our opposing knee, and then we really want this leg to be just about parallel with the floor, pulling our spine up nice and tall, and then gently leaning forward. Once again, we're going to hold all these stretches for approximately 30 to 45 seconds and then move on to the other side. The third stretch that I like to engage in is a stretch for the hip flexors. This includes the psoas muscle that we talked about briefly. For this one, we actually just stagger our legs almost like we're in a lunge stance. So we have these nice 90-degree angles. We're going to make sure that we're pulled completely upright. We're actually going to perform a hip scoop. And what I mean by that is we are actually going to do an anterior pelvic tilt, really driving those hip flexors forward to increase the tension inside of the hip and maybe even get a little bit in the top of the hamstring. You can simply lean forward gently. Remember, we are going to perform these stretches for 30 to 45 seconds, and then we're going to do the opposing side. For the fourth stretch, we're going to be stretching the tendinous muscular bands on the outside of the leg, or the IT bands here. So to stretch the IT bands, we're going to stagger one foot in front of the other. We're going to be slightly bent in the front leg. This left leg should be almost right in midline with your body. We're going to take whichever leg is staggered back, we're going to elevate that arm up overhead, reaching, and we're going to gently push out that same hip, keeping your glutes tight. You should feel this pull all the way from the axillary region or the region under the armpit, all the way down through the obliques, into the hips, and ideally even into the band in the side of that leg there. It may help you to have a supportive object beside you to hold on to when performing this stretch. Once again, 30 to 45 seconds, then move on to the other side. For the fifth and final stretch, we're going to do a hamstring stretch. So for this, we're going to bring one leg forward. We're going to sink back into the opposing leg. We're going to lift our toes up, keeping our body as straight as possible and this leg as straight as possible. We're going to reach down for that. We're going to hold this stretch for approximately 30 to 45 seconds before moving on to the other side. So those are the 5 stretches I recommend doing before engaging in the run after your warm-up. Go ahead out there and tear up the pavement and be safe.